Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here and honored to be here to talk about ransomware. Sorry, it's not going to be a fun and uplifting conversation. I know that you tried to leave the last speaker on an up note, but we're going to talk about ransomware during the next few minutes because that's really what I'm seeing in the industry right now across all industries. And I think it's the biggest risk that all of you are facing. So I'm going to share my screen and start my slides. Bear with me one moment. So again, we're seeing a lot of ransomware right now, and I will tell you that I think a lot of what's happening is as a result of the migration of our workers from the office to home. We have distracted workers. We have workers who are dealing with having to share their workspace with significant others, with college age kids home, with little kids, with parents. And as a result of that, we're seeing a lot of employee error that's causing ransomware attacks. Ransomware attacks are the number one thing that I'm seeing right now and have seen in the last year. Frankly, 95% of the incidents that I respond to are ransomware. So I'm going to talk about a ransomware attack, what the newest ransomware groups are doing so that you can be prepared and ready, because I will tell you they're becoming fast, furious, more sophisticated, and asking for much more money. So I'm going to talk about current trends in cyber threats. It's not going to be uplifting. I apologize. It's really rather distressing, but you need to know what's happening so that you can try to prevent and be resilient against these attacks. And I'll tell you how they're happening. I'll talk about some recent ransomware attacks and how they occur. Right now, they're all happening through phishing and zero-day vulnerabilities, which we'll talk about more. I'll talk about what happens during a ransomware attack, why it's important to have backup systems, but that backup systems are not the end all for a ransomware attack anymore because they have a new business plan. Um, we'll talk about how to implement and the importance of an incident response plan, information sharing, which I've been doing this for 20 years, and a lot of times companies are like, I don't want to share with the FBI or the government. We all are in this together. We all need to share information so that we can prevent other companies from being victims. So I'm really trying to get people to think differently about information sharing. Cyber liability insurance, I'm going to talk about briefly and really to give you some practical tips on questions to ask your broker specifically about ransomware. I'm finding that many companies after the fact realize they don't have appropriate insurance, so it's not covered. They're trying to recover from a ransomware attack and they're realizing that they don't have appropriate coverage. So I'll give you some basic questions. None of this is going to be, I only have a certain amount of time, but I want you to have something practical to take away from this presentation that you can then use in your day-to-day activities. I'll talk about a real world example that I'm dealing with right now for multiple clients. It affected hundreds of clients, and I'm sorry, hundreds of companies globally. It's a real world scenario that I think we can all learn a lot about. And then I'll try to leave some time for questions. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A feature, and I will I'll probably wait to the end and take all of them because it's hard to do both. So again, there is not a single industry that's immune from hacking, and there's not a single industry that is immune from ransomware. It's happening across every industry. The healthcare industry right now is getting hammered. A very large organization, probably the largest healthcare ransomware attack this year, happened last weekend. Universal Health Services, and 400 facilities globally, including in the United States, happened last week. They were hit with a ransomware attack. The healthcare industry is really getting hammered, but so are all the other industries. So don't feel like you're immune. Right now, if you don't know about Larry Ponemon and his reports, the 2020 Ponemon report, he does lots of really great cybersecurity and data privacy and cybersecurity reports. His most recent report indicates that right now, the average time for companies to identify and contain an intrusion that ends up being a data breach, be careful with that word, it's a legal word, but I like to say security incident, is 280 days. So that means they're in your system for 280 days. Think about how much information a bad guy can get in 280 days if they have access to all of your documents, all of your emails. They're sneaky, they're resilient, they're hard to find. Sometimes it's just kismet that you find them in your system. And once you knock them out, then you have to go back and see what the damage is. 280 days, think about that. Because of a remote workforce and the transition from working at home to working working from the office to working in our homes, the actual average cost of a data breach has increased. So now the average cost of a data breach is $4 million. Now, I'll tell you that that's a pretty big data breach. That's the average. There are many, many that are much less than that. But no matter if it's small or large, there are costs associated with a ransomware attack. There are costs associated with a reportable data breach or a security incident that you have to undergo because of the legal obligations that you're required to respond to. And so that's why I want to talk about insurance at the very end. It's a lot of money that you're out of pocket. And in fact, one of the most recent statistics is that 60% of small businesses that get hit with a security incident, data breach, ransomware, whatever it may be, go out of business. 60%. So, in this climate, in this environment, in our economy right now, it's a very dire statistic. So I'm going to concentrate on ransomware because that's what I'm seeing every day. I hate these guys, but they're there and they're really pounding us. So ransomware is malicious software that basically, this is the way I like to talk about it. Basically, through phishing or a 0-day vulnerability, which I'll talk about in a second, they get one of your employees or you to click on a link or an attachment that's malicious, and a tube opens up. Right now, a lot of it's coming out of Nigeria, some's coming out of China, Russia, North Korea. A tube opens up, and this ransomware or malware goes into the tube and starts crawling around your system. It used to be that right away in ransomware attacks, they would drop the ransom bomb, which is what we call it, and they would encrypt all of your data. So just think about that. If you come into the office and you can't get into your email, you can't get into your calendar, you can't get into your contacts, you can't get into any of your documents. Like literally in 2020, we are brought to our knees and we can't get on our computers. That's what happens. So that's a typical ransomware attack. And they ask for Bitcoin. They ask for money. It used to be back in the day, like 10, 15 years ago, they'd ask for 10 grand, 15 grand, maybe $50,000 to get the encryption key back. So they're saying, I've encrypted all your files, I've encrypted your system, pay me $50,000 and I'll give you the encryption key. And in a weird way, you'd pay it and they'd give you the encryption key and you'd be back to normal. Now, listen, don't negotiate with these guys ever. Okay. Don't ever negotiate with any criminal. Don't ever negotiate with a cyber criminal. There are vendors out there that do it legally, that do it well, have experience in doing so. So when you are the victim of a ransomware attack, you don't want to take care of it yourself. You want to get experts in to take care of it, right? So besides the forensics and besides all of that, I'm just going to talk about the basics. you say you pay to get your key back so that you have access to all of your data. Usually they will give it back to you. Kansas Heart Hospital is one of the few victims that got hit twice, but usually you will get your key back and get your data back. There's a new kind of ransomware, unfortunately, that we'll talk about in a second, that is taking this to a new level. But in a ransomware attack, a usual one, they encrypt your data. Sometimes they have access to it, sometimes they don't. They just throw the bomb. When if you don't pay the ransom, you are at risk of losing your files. If you don't have an adequate backup system, you are at risk of being able to do business. So you want to check your business interruption coverage as well. You may experience financial loss due to paying the ransom, the loss of productivity. Think about if your entire company, no one could work, couldn't have access to their emails or their data. You'll have IT costs, legal fees, network modifications, and potentially a reportable data breach that is very costly. This is what a typical ransomware attack, this is what happens. Unfortunately, now we have these new ransomware attackers that are very sophisticated, and the one that I'm going to start with is Maze. And if you want to know more about Maze, go online and check it out. It's not a happy ending. It's not a happy story, but they are basically going in through a phishing or zero-day vulnerability. One of your employees clicks on a link or an attachment, they get into your system through the tube, and instead of dropping the ransom bomb right away, they actually start checking out all the data. Sometimes they're using artificial intelligence to find the social security numbers, the HR data, the health information, the customer data, the intellectual property. So they use artificial intelligence. They're in there. You don't know they're in there, sometimes for many, many days or weeks. They find the data, the most valuable data, and then they exfiltrate it back through the tube, and now they're holding it. And then they drop the ransom bomb. And this is what they're all doing right now. And when they drop that ransom bomb and say, we want not $50,000 anymore, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. I can't tell you how much money that they've received that I'm even aware of, multiple millions of dollars. And you have a robust backup system, so you migrate to your backup system. And the best thing is when your third-party vendor says, go pound sand, the company has a robust backup system. Then they say, oh, but by the way, we have all your data. So if you don't pay us for a certificate of destruction, we're going to publish all your data, not on the dark web. We're going to publish all your data on the internet so anyone can see it. So all your employees' social security numbers, all your customers' information, all of your intellectual property, that new product that you want to come out with, all those designs, we're going to put it right up on the internet. All your most valuable data. And we're going to do that unless you pay us for a certificate of destruction. So now, not only do you have robust backup so that you can recover from a ransomware attack, now they have your data, they're going to publish it, and they're going to put it on a shaming website unless you pay for a certificate of destruction. It's a very new world. So they've been with Maze in particular. Maze has hit all industries, and if the victim does not pay for the certificate of destruction, they will post it on the internet, including full dumps of data on the internet if they don't pay the ransom. Soda no Kibi is a family of ransomware that targets Windows system. It encrypts files and asks for a ransom to decrypt them. They are now following Maze, and they're exfiltrating data. And if you don't pay for the encryption key or the certificate of destruction, they'll put it on the internet. So Maze has become so sophisticated and nasty that they've launched a public shaming site called mazenews.top. And it contains a list of all the organizations that they victimized that refuse to pay for a certificate of destruction or a ransom. The details include the date of the exfiltration, the amount of the collected data, and some include proof of life or the actual data with zip archives that they've posted online. What's interesting to watch is once they post all this data online, all of a sudden you'll see some of this. I mean, I have guys that I have companies that monitor this for me, but literally they'll post the data and then the next day the data will be gone because the victim paid the ransom to take the data off the internet. All of them are following this unique idea, this unique nasty idea. So Doppelpaymer is another very large and successful ransomware group. And they have a website called DoppelLeaks that they started in late February of this year. And they name and shame the affected organizations that have rejected their demands. And it provides examples of files for the victim to demonstrate that the threats are real. They just post it right on the internet. Again, think about your HR data, your customer data, your treasures, your intellectual property just being posted on the internet, even for a short amount of time. That's what they're really relying on, that you will pay that ransom so that the information will be taken offline and you can get a certificate of destruction. So we'll talk about how to address that. It's very hard to address because it used to be we could deal with ransomware attacks by having a robust backup system, and now that they're exfiltrating the data, it's much harder to respond. So the two ways that we're seeing successful ransomware attacks are, one is phishing, very traditional. It's working really well. Our employees are distracted. Our employees are clicking on links and attachments specifically around COVID-19. You've got to understand your employees they're afraid. They're trying to get information. They're afraid for themselves. They're afraid for their family. They're not as focused as they usually are. They're distracted. Employee education is a really important thing that you should be thinking about right now, because phishing is the number one way that successful ransomware attacks are launched. The second one is zero-day vulnerabilities. And I will say in the last year, really the last 6 months, I've seen more zero-day vulnerability cyber attacks than I've ever seen in 20 years. And a zero-day vulnerability basically means that, all software, when it is developed by a software vendor, might not have, it's not perfect. It's not because anyone did anything wrong. It's just not perfect. And as technology advances, the code becomes outdated and vulnerabilities are found. And we've got security researchers out there that are looking at these vulnerabilities online, and they're finding that hackers are exploiting these vulnerabilities in the wild and then determining how to use these vulnerabilities. Many of you know that Microsoft has, and this is nothing against Microsoft, they have very fine products, but they're well known for once a month to have Patch Tuesday. And in those Patch Tuesdays, the most recent one, they had like 120 vulnerabilities and patches that they sent out to all of their customers, not because they did anything wrong. Again, it's because they found that there were some vulnerabilities and they're patching them. A zero-day vulnerability is when the bad guys find the vulnerability before the software vendor can patch it, and they use that vulnerability to get into your system. We saw a very well-known zero-day vulnerability was the Citrix NetScaler. Another very well-known zero-day vulnerability recently is Cisco. Several weeks ago, came out with an alert about a zero-day vulnerability that they were looking to patch. be aware of make sure that you have a patching process, make sure that you're patching quickly, efficiently, and as they're coming out from the manufacturer, because if you don't patch, that vulnerability is open and they're using them more than I've ever seen them before. So check with your IT folks to make sure you have a patching process, and that they're also getting the security alerts from the vendors regarding vulnerabilities. So what happens, we talked about this a little bit, the ransomware bomb is exploded. They demand the ransom to give you the encryption keys. Sometimes they encrypt files on the hard drive. Sometimes they are able to migrate the ransomware directly to your backup. So that's really awful when that happens. Most ransomware enters the system through an attachment or an email message or a zero-day vulnerability. So your employees really need to know about phishing, and employee education is super important in prevention of phishing and ransomware attacks. So your backup system is very, very important. So they're really the only way that, unless you pay the ransom, they're really the only way that you can recover from a ransomware attack that's occurred. And many security professionals, including your folks at Compass IT, obviously they can help you make sure that you have a robust backup system. They can make sure that you have a backup system that is not connected to your actual system, so there's no migration of the ransomware. And your Compass IT professionals can also help you test that backup system, which I recommend, because you need to be ready in the event that you have to migrate, and you're much more prepared if you've tested your backup system. All right. The second thing I want to talk about with respect to what you do following a ransomware attack is you really are going to be much more prepared if you have an incident response plan. And an incident response plan is one that it provides you with the process by which you can respond to any security incident, including a ransomware attack. Okay, and I think ransomware attacks are the hardest to respond to from an incident response planning perspective, because if your incident response team doesn't have access to everybody's contact information, and they're relying on their contacts in your email or your system, you literally, people don't even know how to call each other. They don't have their cell phone numbers. Sometimes paper is good. So when you're thinking about your incident response planning, think it through from a ransomware attack, and understand that some of this needs to be on paper as well. You need to have people's private email accounts, their mobile numbers, so that you're not relying on your system. Determine who your stakeholders are in your incident response planning. You want leadership involved. You want your IT and information security leadership, audit, finance, human resources, communications, and legal counsel. That's just a list. You have to determine who are the right people for your incident response plan and your incident response team. You need to determine what decisions are going to be made. Obtain and clarify cyber liability insurance. Your insurance company is going to be very involved if you are hit with a ransomware attack. Determine the vendors that are needed, including forensics, outside legal counsel, mitigation, crisis management, communications. These are just tips that to consider when you're thinking about your incident response planning. But if you don't have an incident response plan and you're hit with ransomware, it's very, very challenging. So I recommend that you have an incident response plan. Establish your team. Make sure that that everybody knows what their responsibilities are. These are the goals. The basic goals of incident response planning is to assess the incident and the threat level, define the actions that have to be taken, respond to the incident, document and collect the information about the incident, communicate with with whomever needs to be communicated with, and then mitigate. And obviously containment is one of the first things that you have to address. Your incident response team will be conducting the investigation into the incident, coordinating the response, establishing the communication protocols, providing notice to the appropriate regulatory authorities, and coordinating with third-party service providers. Again, a lot of this is done through your insurance carrier. If you don't have cyber liability insurance, you may wish to consider looking at that. And also, legal counsel is very important in this process. It's not just a plug for legal counsel, but there are so many legal determinations in an incident, and also you want to consider all of the communication being under attorney-client privilege. It's just super important when you're responding to an incident. And also, legal counsel will assist in determining whether or not you have any legal obligations to notify affected individuals or regulatory authorities. So in preparing for your incident response plan, and the next step would be making sure you have your incident response plan, but also conducting a tabletop exercise, which we'll talk about in a second. But a tabletop exercise is really when you get everybody together on your incident response team and you go through a scenario. You don't prepare for it. You go through a scenario. You talk about who's going to do what are the implications, who do you have to get in touch with. There's so many moving parts following a ransomware attack in particular, that if you're running around like a chicken with their head cut off, you're not very efficient. So when I'm doing tabletop exercises now with clients, I'm spending a lot of time on ransomware exercises and attacks, because they are particularly difficult to respond to, because usually your system is down or it takes some time to migrate to your backup. So when you are determining what information and who you need to get involved, some of the things to consider are determining whether or not you have insurance and it'll cover a ransomware attack, whether it'll cover a ransom payment. If you do have coverage for a ransom payment, the insurance company will always require pre-approval, so be aware of that as well. But if you're going to you're going to use Compass IT as your forensic vendor, you want to get pre-approval for Compass IT to be your forensic vendor through your insurance company now, because they have vendors that are available to you on a panel. So if you want to use Compass IT, you want to use Robinson Cole, you want to use some other company that does incident response, make sure that you get pre-approval, and you do that before you're in the incident, because you don't want to have to do that while you're responding to an incident. Other vendors that you need following a ransomware attack, a typical ransomware attack: credit monitoring, call center, identity theft mitigation. You might have to give credit monitoring to individuals if you're legally required. And it's the personal information that's been exfiltrated includes any type of social security numbers or driver's license numbers and other sensitive data. Outside legal counsel, as I said before, you need to have your cyber insurance broker and insurance companies' phone numbers written down. Don't rely on your contacts in your system, so that you have that number and you can call them immediately following an incident to determine whether or not there's coverage and if they have services to provide to you. Law enforcement officials, do you know who to call at FBI? That's an important, the Rhode Island Cyber Fusion Center, the Rhode Island State Police. You should know, you should have Eric Yell and the Cyber Fusion Center written down as if you're on the cyber incident response team, any applicable regulatory bodies, information sharing entities, distribute the plan to your team, look at it at least annually, and conduct a tabletop exercise at least annually, if not more. So I'm going to talk a little bit, again, this is not all inclusive. These are just some tips for you to be able to go to your broker, to think about a ransomware attack, and to think about questions that you can ask your broker about a ransomware attack. Is there coverage to access or restore the data? Is there coverage for the actual payment of a ransom? Do you have business interruption coverage so that's not on here, but I'm throwing that out here. What happens if your company is down for 2 weeks because you're trying to migrate to the backup? Do you have business interruption coverage? Is there coverage that will cover any destruction or disruption to your telephone or computer system? A lot of times that's property damage. So if they come in and they destroy your system, which they do at times, do you have coverage for that? Business or business interruption, it was there. Is the data that is stored or backed up using cloud services covered in the event of a cyber incident, no matter what the cause? Is there coverage for damages, costs, or fines for a social engineering fraud? So I will tell you that there are social engineering riders, because in a social engineering scheme, the hacker has duped your employee to wire information to the hacker voluntarily. So in that particular instance, the employee voluntarily wired the information. In many instances, that might not be covered by a typical insurance product. Make sure that you have coverage for a social engineering fraud. If there's a data breach, do you have coverage for net profits, income? Do you have coverage for class action litigation? I'm finding that following data breaches, unfortunately now more than ever before, we're seeing class action data breaches filed within days on rather small data breaches. So the plaintiff's bar has figured out that this is a way that they can make money, and they're catching up, and they are filing class action litigation more than I've ever seen. So I'm going to give you another. I want to leave a couple minutes for questions, but I also want to talk about a specific incident that happened that I'm dealing with right now that I think is really important for you to be aware of, and that's the Blackbaud breach. Blackbaud's a software vendor for not-for-profit entities, healthcare, education, higher education, and they were a victim of ransomware between February of 2020 and May of 2020. And in July, they notified, I think it's been publicly reported, hundreds, if not thousands of companies around the globe, that the information that was in their some of their products had been compromised in a ransomware attack. If you want to learn more about this incident, which I think is it's a really good case study on ransomware, go to Blackbaud's website. They've done a very good job in explaining what happened and what they did. What happened is they were the victim of a ransomware attack. They discovered the ransomware attack sometime in May. They determined all of the customers. They got forensics in. They determined all of the customers who were affected by the ransomware attack. In the process of notifying all of their customers, all of which were the same, the notification were the same, they advised all their customers that they paid for a certificate of destruction. They didn't say certificate of destruction, but that they paid the ransom for confirmation from the hackers that the data was destroyed. And when you think about that concept of paying cyber criminals for them to say that they certify that they've destroyed the data, it's one thing when your data has already been posted online, because then you can see that your data has been taken offline once you have paid the ransom. In this particular case, when you pay the ransom before they publish it, or so they won't publish it, they will literally in an email confirm that they've destroyed the data. Blackbaud, I thought, did a very good job of basically saying that we know that this is a hard concept to understand, that we can rely on the fact that these hackers have destroyed our data, but we believe we can because um, because it's their business plan. These hackers have this new business plan where they know that if we pay the ransom and then they use the data, or they publish the data, or they sell the data, that no one will pay a ransom in the future. And they're making millions and millions, millions and millions of dollars, right? The next year we'll find out how much these guys made on this, but this is a new business plan, and it's very hard for companies to respond or prevent the exfiltration of the data. Obviously, you want to do remote monitoring. You want to make sure that you can see when data is exfiltrated. Talk to Compass IT about all the IT and tools you can use to prevent the exfiltration of data before it's exfiltrated. That's Compass IT's area. But once they've exfiltrated it, it's very hard to respond. The second thing that Blackbaud said, which I thought was interesting, is not only is this their business plan so we can rely on it, we also have companies that are monitoring the dark web for any of our data. So they actually hired companies to monitor the dark web to make sure that the information is not being published. And then finally, I'll say that the company that I previously said don't negotiate with these cyber criminals. There are companies that are well equipped and can do it legally. These companies have been watching both the internet and the dark web to determine, specifically for the ransomware groups that I talked about earlier, including Maze, that if they're paid for the certificate of destruction or the confirmation of destruction, they've been monitoring the web to determine whether or not that data has actually been leaked. And thus far, there's no evidence that any of the data has been leaked. So these cyber criminals are men of their word. I hate saying that because it's an oxymoron, but that's what the data would tell you right now. So unfortunately, I am ending on a negative note, but because it's a scary world. The things that I want you to think about as you leave at least my presentation is, think about ransomware. Think about your distracted employees. Give them support. Even if it's an email that says, we want to remind you while you're working at home about phishing, and we want to remind you that this is still a huge problem. Don't click on any COVID-19 links. That's what they're all clicking on because they think it's the newest statistic or information. Employee education is really huge here. Having an incident response plan, having a robust backup plan, having your Compass IT, your IT professional, prepare you on a technological basis for a ransomware attack, having a robust backup system, and testing it. Not just that you have it, test it. have your Compass IT professional look at your backup system, make sure that it's not vulnerable in the event that you are the victim of a ransomware attack through phishing or zero-day vulnerability. Have a robust patching program. Make sure you have one and that they're being patched on a timely basis. And talk to your broker about insurance. Have an incident response plan and team, and talk to your broker about cyber liability insurance, business interruption, so that in the event of social engineering, phishing, any type of a ransomware attack, you are able to recover financially from the destruction that it causes. It's very disruptive. So those are the things that are kind of my takeaways today. And with that, oh, and third-party management. I knew I had one more slide. So, we talked about Blackbaud. Blackbaud was a third-party vendor, a software vendor of hundreds and thousands. It's being reported thousands of companies. They were a vendor, and they notified their customers, and their customers then had to determine whether or not they had any reporting obligations. And many of you, I'm sure, have received those notifications. There will be more coming out as more and more companies review their data, determine whether or not they have any legal obligations, depending on what data was in the Blackbaud product. And as a result, the companies now are saying, well, this wasn't our fault. This was their fault. What are we going to do? That's another thing to be thinking about with your insurance broker. I didn't put that in my slides, but do you have insurance in the event that it's your third-party service provider who caused the security incident or the reportable data breach? Because your insurance company might come back and say, well, we insured you in the event that you had a breach, but we're not insuring all your third-party vendors. Be thinking about that. Talk to your broker about that. And then in managing third-party vulnerabilities and those risks, understand that if it's your third-party vendor, it's your problem. You can't just rely on them. They're going to come back to you under the contract and say, we notified you. A vendor management program reduces your risks. Map your high-risk vendors. Your high-risk vendors would be payroll, benefits, IT, anyone who has access to your system, anyone who has access to your HR data, your financial data. Closely review and negotiate the contracts with those vendors. The contracts, the devil is in those details. Don't just sign the contracts that you're getting. Make sure that you are protecting yourself and that they are providing you with notice and reimbursement in the event that they cause the incident. And lastly, it's important in your due diligence to think about potentially sending security questionnaires to your vendors to make sure that they have administrative, physical, and technical safeguards for your data. So with that, I think that's the last one. It is. I'm going to stop sharing and go to the Q&A. Okay. If it's okay, I'll just answer that. We have time, right?
We do. Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Oh, did you want to do the questions?
No, not at all. And that's perfectly fine. Whatever makes you most comfortable.
Okay. You know me, I'll just keep going. Okay. All right. The first one is, what, if anything, can be done to determine when you were attacked and how far to roll back to? Yeah, it's a great question. So obviously your Compass IT guys will be able to help you with that, and gals. I hope we have some more gals in cybersecurity. We're trying. So basically what happens is that we get forensics in, like Compass IT, and Compass IT will do a forensic analysis. And a lot of times, actually, Jeff, you can probably answer this too, but a lot of times some companies don't have their logging capabilities on. So another thing to go back to your IT folks to say, hey, do we have our logs on? They'll look at the logs and they'll do a forensic analysis. And I rely on the Compass IT folks to really determine when the intrusion happened. They do it through tools and forensics. And then once you determine what happened, and I would have you consider getting outside forensics to do that and not do it internally. Then we determine what, if anything, may have been accessed, and then they'll run tools to determine whether or not there was any PII, so personal information or protected health information. Jeff, do you want to dovetail any of that?
No, that's perfect, Lynn. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go in and we'll kind of understand, exactly as you said, what was accessed, how it was accessed, and was it exfiltrated? That's really the big kind of key question that needs to get answered is, number one, was it accessed? But two, did it leave the organization? And what does that put on you as an organization for reporting requirements and breach notifications and things like that? So I think the first piece is we tell organizations, don't hit the panic button yet. Let's do our due diligence. Let's understand the access piece, how far back it went, but then second most important, what was it taken out of the organization? Because if it wasn't taken out of the organization, there's different requirements. If it was taken out, that's a little bit more scary that you could speak to for sure.
Yeah, so great point, because if the IT forensics comes back and says there's no evidence of access or exfiltration, then we can state with some certainty that there was no that the security incident was not a reportable data breach under state laws. Now, you want your lawyer to make that determination. The other thing I'll say in response to Jeff's comment is also be super careful when you're in a security incident about emails. If you don't have counsel involved, all of those emails are discoverable. And remember when I said we're seeing all these class action litigation, they're just suing left and right. The first thing they ask for are all the documents, all the emails following the incident. Well, if you've got legal counsel involved, there's an argument that they can fall under the attorney-client privilege. If you're just IT back and forth going, oh my God, we have a breach and we have a this and we have a that. Oh my God, I've seen some awful emails. Be super careful about the chatter. The email should say, let's all get on a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever, all right? 3:00, here's the call-in number. That's what I want the email to say, okay? The second one was the Blackbaud breach of this type. They paid for a certificate of destruction. How can you trust the criminal will destroy? So you can't really trust these criminals. However, I will tell you that so far there is no evidence that they are, once they're paid for the confirmation of destruction, thus far, there's no evidence that that has been determined that they are actually selling or using the information. Doppelpaymer will also go after your backup and change the retention policy to 0. Yeah, these guys are nasty. I don't know what else to say except they're nasty. Next question. We are built on Salesforce and it's hard to do a DR, disaster recovery, or do a tabletop with them. Has anyone done a DR test with Salesforce? Interesting. I haven't. I do my own. But so let me just tell you quickly about a disaster recovery or a tabletop. It's most effective when no one knows what the scenario is. It's also most effective when you do it over at least a 2-hour period of time. So I love doing tabletops because I use real live scenarios. I recommend that you don't have to, but you should consider having your counsel involved, because there's also your counsel is going to be involved all the way along, and we kind of know where you guys get in trouble. So consider using your counsel, internal, external, but I don't have a specific answer about Salesforce. The next question is, we have 2 more minutes, right, Jeff? I have a couple minutes. May you guess the percentage of known versus unknown disclosure of paying a ransom? May you guess the percentage of known versus unknown disclosure of paying a ransom? I'm not sure I understand that, but um, certainly now the trend of these more sophisticated ransomware groups is to disclose the data and put it on the internet, because it's just working so well, because you really don't have any way to combat it. You don't have your backup. Once they have it and once they post it on the internet, there's really nothing you can do about it. We're going to see a lot more of that. We're going to see a lot more copycatting on that. What about the advice to not negotiate with these criminals, only pay if they offer a certificate of destruction? What I'm saying is, you can, I don't want your IT professionals. I have a great slide where I have a slide where an IT professional is emailing back and forth with the cyber criminal going, I'm losing sleep over this. I look like a fool. Why are you doing this to me? I don't deserve this. What I'm saying is you shouldn't be emailing with these guys. Use a professional who has experience. Those professionals who have experience actually negotiate, and you can negotiate the price. Everything's negotiable. I don't want you doing it. I want you to use professionals who have experience in doing it. And only pay if they offer a certificate of destruction. I will tell you that whether you pay or not, one, depends on obviously if you have insurance that will assist you with that. And two, it all depends on the scenario. So if they've exfiltrated data that you really don't care about, then you weigh that. You're always weighing the risk and benefit. So it all depends. To prevent ransomware payloads from taking root and the bomb going off, how effective is software that prevents any unauthorized software from being run? That is one tool that I think is quite good, and your Compass IT folks can certainly help you with determining the appropriate tools for preventing an exfiltration. Do you see cyber liability insurance being harder to get or premiums being more costly? I will tell you, because of these increases in ransomware, we have clients who have told me that it's hard to, and others, right, in the industry, it's harder to get specific coverage, and it's getting more expensive. That's just, I don't think you need to hear it. That's not a legal thing. That's just a fact. Do I have privilege with internal counsel? It's debatable. I will tell you that. It depends. If internal counsel is actually providing you with legal counsel, they're the lawyer and you're the business, then you have a better argument to say that it's internal counsel. I will tell you that it's easier to argue if you have outside counsel helping you. And is there a difference in timing and notification to customers between Blackbaud 2 months and Tyler next day because of the type of breach? There's I don't have enough time to answer this appropriately, but yes, there is a difference in the Blackbaud situation. They were going through a forensic investigation, so in many instances, you don't even know that there's been a security incident until you finish your forensics. When you finish your forensics, then you're looking at your contracts to determine who you have to notify and the contractual obligations. And then Tyler Technologies was one, and also GDPR, the European data privacy law, requires notification within 72 hours, which complicates all this. But finally, Tyler Technologies, they were a vendor of many DoD and governmental entities, so that's a whole different story. Finally, do you see legal counsel, cyber insurers, including assessments as part of the policy engagement process? We're starting to see that, but I don't see it that much, because cyber insurance has increased so much. They're really trying to respond to incidents, ransomware, breach coaching. So you can ask, but I'm seeing it less and less. That used to be the case. And with that,